talk about love. Yeah, I got fears, but I ain't got no love. Yes, I got fears. Fear of plane crash. Fear of car crash. Oh, fear of sex. Fear of alcohol.
Okay, so today what we want to cover is the murder of Cheri Jo Bates. This happened on October 30th, 1966, so it's an old case. But it stuck with me for a while, certainly in the past 5 years. This was the first case that I worked on with the History Channel for the hunt for the Zodiac Killer. I have a lot to say about this case, and you know, there was some controversy, I guess, in regards to this case with me personally, because when we went to film Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, myself and my partner on the show, Salar Barbera, again, this was the first case, so I was really into it and I was really investigating it the way that, you know, I know how. I didn't realize later that, you know, TV is a little bit scripted, and when they say reality, it isn't actually reality. But nonetheless, when we got on set, we did everything. You know, we had the old detective in this case, a gentleman named Shumway, and Jim Simons, you know, show us some things. It was very unique in the fact that Riverside Police Department did not let outsiders look at this case or any case that I know of, but they did on this case. And the reason they did was Sal's connection with the police chief at the time. We got to test items from the crime scene, specifically the victim's pants and the suspect's watch, which was ripped off at the scene, and we'll get into that for you guys that don't know much about this case a little later. But during the first episode of that show, there was a moment in there where I was interviewed and I was asked about how I felt in general about police departments having cold cases that are 30 years old or even older, and them not sharing police reports with people that could help. And my comment to that was, well, how's that working out for you, buddy? And those two detectives from Riverside did not like that. And I got emails from both of them the following day after the show aired. Both of them were not very cordial. One was a little worse than the other. But it is what it is. I tried to explain to them, hey, I wasn't specifically referring to this case, you know, even though they put that segment there. And, you know, I got no response, and they vented, and it is what it is. But so during that episode and during the time that I spent at Riverside, I was given access to the police reports. And I guess this is a big thing in the Zodiac community, because this potentially is a Zodiac victim, and I'll get into whether I believe that or not. And I actually obtained copies of these reports. And at some time, a couple years after the show aired, I thought about releasing these documents because I seen how the Zodiac community reacted. They really wanted these. And I've always been a firm believer that quote-unquote amateur detectives can offer something. Now, there's some that can't offer anything, but there's some that can, just like any vocation. So I was going to release them. Well, that set off a firestorm, and I did and I did not understand the magnitude of it. You know, for me, I don't really care too much about what other people say. I'm going to do what I feel is right. But I did not end up releasing those reports. And, you know, after receiving a very, I guess derogatory would be a bad word, but a harsh email from the detective in time that during that time was still in charge of the case, and I responded back rather curtly and stated, you know, it's how you come off to people. You know, if you're going to come off as a big tough guy and this and that and threaten me, you know, with lawsuits and things like that, what do you expect in return? You're going to get, you know, another alpha who's going to be pushing back against you. And basically, you know, I was very upset about that. And I let him know. It's how you come off to people, you know. Eventually, through some correspondence, back and forth, that detective apologized to me. In a very, I felt, genuine manner about how he came off. Now, Sal, he had called me and he said, hey, I'm going to ask you as a friend not to release those reports. The reason being is I gave my word to the chief of police at the time, who was Sal's friend, that he wouldn't do that. And it was at that time, the combination of the detective apologizing to me that I felt was very genuine, and number two, Sal asking me as a friend not to do it. I said, okay, I'm not going to release these reports. And the reason is simple. I'm a man of my word. If you don't have your word, you're nothing. You know, what did Al Pacino and Scarface say? I only have my balls and my word, and I don't break either of them for nobody. I relate to that, okay? So it wasn't a tough decision then. You know, I'm a man of my word. Sal asked me, yeah, hey, for you, the detective, because of the way it takes a man to admit, hey, I was wrong, I talked to you wrong, and these are the reasons that I'm asking you not to do it in a polite, professional manner. Okay. You know, I got no problem with it. So me and that detective hashed things out. I have no idea if he's still in charge of this. I don't think he is. But still, I'm a man of my word, and I will not release those. So now that we got that out of the way, I can still talk about the case. I read the reports, obviously, for the show. And a lot of the stuff that I said about the case on the show didn't air. But there isn't going to be a problem with me talking about this case. And when I researched the case, I wanted to see what was out there on the internet, because I didn't want to jeopardize the case at all and release information that wasn't already out there. And to be honest, there isn't. Like, almost everything that's in those police reports seems to be out there in the internet and on these forums already. So I felt very comfortable at this juncture doing this case, which means a lot to me. And one of the reasons that means a lot to me is because I got to interview Cheri Jo Bates' brother, Michael. And for the actual show on the History Channel, they didn't show that. Then they did some sort of extended version and they released it. I don't know why they left that out originally, but I remember it because it was very emotional. And it was long. You know, it was hours. And it had an impact on me. And the biggest impact on me is when Michael brought down a bunch of Cheri Jo Bates' things in an envelope. And when I was emptying it out, I'll never forget it. I'm emptying it out, and out comes this little note. It says, "Dad, I'm going to the library." And I had seen that note on newspapers, on a lot of things when I was researching it, and it hit me. I'm a big thing. I'm big on artifacts. That's why I like to go back to the crime scene so much. For some reason, crime scenes and artifacts, they get me, and I don't know why. So I'm holding this artifact, this letter that I know that the victim wrote just hours before her death. And it really impacted me, and I'll never forget that. And this is the actual picture of it. So, anyways, that's an overview of this case. Let's get going. That was that. Let's get into the crux of it. So, on October 30th, 1966, Cheri Jo Bates tells her dad and leaves a note, says, "I'm going to the library." She actually calls a friend of hers, I believe twice, to say, "Hey, I'm going to the library. Can you come with me?" The friend does not want to go and doesn't go. She drives in her VW Bug, which is light mist green in color, to the library. She is seen by at least 2 people that knew her going to that direction. I guess because there's some people that claim that she never made it to the library. I don't believe that. She goes to the library. She's inside the library. Around 6 o'clock is the belief, the time that she got there. Some people that knew her said they didn't see her in the library. But there was some that said they did. I believe she was there. She parks her car in front of the library, or behind the library, depending upon where the front and where the back is, but it's parallel to the library. Now, that's important because remember the first detective that I told you about that was in the hunt for the Zodiac Killer, Shumway? He gave us a completely different location than where the car actually was parked. I found that out when I was reading the police report. I seen the sketch, I seen the measurements of where the car was. And I'm like, this idiot, who then wants to chastise me for a statement that I said on the show, it's his case and he doesn't even know where the car was parked? No, I was really upset about that. You lied to us. And then, as years gone by, it's been 5 years I think now, I think, did he do that on purpose? Because people didn't know where, you always sometimes want to keep something back to your vet that only the killer knows. And I thought maybe that was it, and I thought, well, okay, yeah, he lied to us. We filmed a whole day's worth of footage based off of what he said, and it was wrong, which could throw the whole assessment, and it did. It threw my whole assessment into a loop. So maybe it was just because he didn't want that information out there. Well, I found out that that's wrong. That information was already out there. So it's my belief that, yeah, he was just, whether it's forgetfulness, whether it's ignorance, him being cocky, which I believe, in my opinion, he was, and basically a jerk to me, he just didn't know his own case. Yeah, so, hey, he has to look himself in the mirror. I don't worry or concern myself about what he does. But the fact of the matter is, her car was parked in a different location than he told us. Around 9 o'clock, she comes out. We don't know this. Okay, this is speculation. What we do know is that at 6:30 in the morning, her body is found about 100 yards away from her car in a dirt alley between two vacant houses. Now, I was lucky enough to go back to the scene of this, and it certainly doesn't look the way it did back then. But nonetheless, I was able to do that, and I felt that was imperative. I always feel that's imperative. And that's what we know. Okay? The next day, police, Joseph Bates, which is Cheri Jo Bates' father, puts out a missing persons report. At like 5:43 a.m. that next morning, because she never showed up, and it was odd. And we'll get into victimology and stuff like that, but police are looking for a yellow VW Bug. A patrolman passes that car at the library on 2 different occasions. On the 3rd occasion, he runs into her friend named Cheri, who says, no. She has a green VW. And he's like, oh, I saw that. He goes back up to the library. There it is. Now, being a very astute patrolman, he gets out and he's inspecting Cheri Jo Bates' vehicle. He realizes that it's cold, okay? Not just the hood. He reaches into the engine, or looks into the engine compartment, and he feels the exhaust pipes leaving the engine are cold. While he's doing that, he notices that the distributor wire is pulled from the distributor cap. Cars were very simple back then. I remember when I was 16 years old, I put a 400 big block motor in my Trans Am, 1979 Trans Am. And I'm not a car person, but I was able to do that just because everything was so much simpler. You certainly would never even attempt to do that now. But he noticed that. That is obviously key to this case. Very key. He radios his finding. Hey, I found the car, distributor cap, just a wire. There's been speculation that the whole cap was removed. Wires were ripped out. Listen, I read the actual police reports. Misinformation is the number one thing that keeps these cases cold. It is imperative that you know that it was just one wire. Okay? That's what we know. Okay? They start interviewing people in the area. 2 witnesses step forward. One says, I seen a man in the alleyway where Cheri Jo Bates was murdered at around 9 o'clock that night. This is what he's wearing. He's a white male smoking a cigarette, that. A second person, this is the day after the murders, not years like it has been reported or whatever, stated, I heard a scream, and then a muffled scream, and then a car starting up very loudly and leaving the area about 2 minutes after I heard that scream. That is very important, okay? She heard this scream between 10:15 and 10:30, is what she says. Now let's jump to victimology. What do we know about Cheri Jo Bates? We know that right now she is no longer alive. We know that she was a cheerleader. She was very attractive. She was a freshman at the college at Riverside. She was an average student. She was, I believe, Catholic. She had gone to church just the day previous. It could have been that day. So the day before she was murdered. The day of. It gets complicated, as it always does, when the body's not found until the 31st. But the 30th is when she is technically, I guess, her last day on Earth. Unfortunately. She had gone there with her dad. She had breakfast, and this is going to be a key component in this as well. She had breakfast at a place called Sandy's after church, and it was just her and her dad. Now, the reason this is important is because someone interjects themselves into this breakfast, allegedly. And that's going to be key. So through victimology, she's dating a guy named Dennis Highland, who I believe was a football player who lived or was going to college somewhere else. A week previous to this homicide, they have agreed to become engaged, to be married. That plays a key role in this as well. Now, Cheri Jo Bates, by all accounts, only has this boyfriend, Dennis. But as you will come to learn, it seems that everything isn't always as it seems. And by that, I mean, Cheri Jo Bates had a diary. In this diary, there were a lot of entries in 1965. She did not have a bunch in 1966, but the one she had in 1966, the year of her death, she talked a lot about Dennis, as you would expect. But in 1965, there was several, and by several I'm going to say at least 5 or more entries about another individual who we will name BB. Now, the reason we say BB is because if you look on the internet forums, that is what he is known as. It is obviously an alias for the real name of Riverside Police Department suspect. And this is no breaking news. This is all out there. And we'll get into this suspect and why Riverside believes he is their guy. But in 1965, Cheri Jo Bates wrote a lot about him. And again, it appears that it's possible that you don't want to say she's living a double life, because I think that would be a stretch. But it seems that maybe she has something going on that her friends and family don't know about. And that's not uncommon, okay? You see that a lot in victims, and that's why victimology is so important. And that's why when you do victimology, you don't just talk to family and friends. Now, you have to talk to both. Family's going to give you some great information that the friends don't know, and the friends are going to give you information that the family don't know. But you got to go outside of that. You got to talk to associates, people that, let's say, are in the library where she frequents, campus, other people that could see her. You're going to get a different understanding and an overall understanding of who the victim is, and in this case, Cheri Jo Bates. So, let's talk about the crime scene. Okay, Cheri Jo Bates is found in a lot which is 70 feet by 70 feet are the measurements. You get to this lot off of a road that's called Teresita. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. And that's a main corridor. This alleyway that goes to this lot is not. You generally wouldn't be walking down this path And that's going to play a key role in my assessment of this. She had been stabbed numerous times. I read that she had some stab wounds in her back, at least one. Her lip was split open. I believe that is from a punch. Her throat was cut. A very violent death. You could tell that by the gravel lot area where her body was found was tore up. They did find a set of footprints, heel prints to be more specific, and leading to the body and leading to the street, which I would expect to see. They made plaster casts of this, and when we get into the evidence of this case, I will talk specifically about that. And also located about 10 feet from the body of Cheri Jo Bates was a men's watch that was the band had broken. No doubt that this is the suspect's watch. It was a Timex watch, and we'll get into specifics about that. Fast forward from 1966 to 2017, I had the opportunity to work on that watch along with, again, the victim's pants. And I did observe something on those pants that I find significant. And when we get in the evidence, we'll talk about that. Excuse me while I have a drink. The crime scene is a very dimly lit, if not at all lit, area. It does make a very good place to commit a murder. However, as you will come to realize, I don't think that was the intention to be murdered or to have the murder take place there. And I'll get into why I feel that that is important. That's the crime scene. Okay, now let's get into the evidence that is being collected. I talked about the heel prints. The heel prints come back, they do plaster casters of it, and it's a military type of shoe that is sold to, I believe, federal prisons or military. I do not know whether these are the killer's prints. And the reason I say that is because the people that found Cheri Jo Bates' body initially was a guy whose first name I believe was Cleo. He was a groundsman there. He found her. He went and got a couple other people. They came back. So you have those footprints certainly mixed in with the killer's prints and the victim's, right? So how do you separate them? Well, you look at the victim's shoes, and this is another thing where police and maybe the newspaper are not on the same page. If you look at this newspaper article, it says that her shoes are missing. That's not the case. Okay, when I looked at the evidence reports, her shoes are certainly on her feet. And they're there during her autopsy. They're described as sandals or, I believe, Zoris. Now, back to the plaster casters of the heel print. 400 feet away, out on the main road type area where they're searching for a possible murder weapon, investigators find another heel print that matches the same match as they found next to Cheri Jo Bates' body. And they took a plaster cast of that. But during this search, there was some ivy that was growing along very thick alongside one of the houses next to where the body is. They're taking that apart looking for a murder weapon. The groundsman is there, and they look at his shoes, and he has the exact pattern as that was found. Now, does that make him a suspect? I guess it could. But he has reason for his feet to he discovered the body. Right? So I'm not sure if those footprints, and they have gone into this mythological status as being linked to Zodiac's, because one of Zodiac's shoe prints, boot prints, found at, I believe, Lake Berryessa, were wing walker shoes, and they come from a military base, so on and so forth. So people want to connect that. I'm not even sure if these prints, these boot prints, are of the suspects. They certainly appear, from what I read, to belong to the maintenance guy. Should he be checked out further? Yes, and I'm sure they did. So what else do we have? We have the suspect's watch, a Timex watch. This was traced back. Well, hold on. Let me go back to the heel print before I forget this, because this is important. I said that it was sold only to federal prisons and the military. It was a B.F. Goodrich type of sole. It was size 8 to 10, which is fairly small. I don't know what size Cleo's was, but I'm sure, you know, I don't remember, and I don't have all of the police reports. You know, that I don't have them all. Although I did read them, and I remember a lot from them. I don't remember seeing that. The watch was a Timex watch. It was a cheap Timex watch, according to the reports. $9.95 was the retail value of it. It was manufactured in Great Britain and shipped to Little Rock, Arkansas in 1964. That's what they traced. It had a 7-inch wrist circumference. There were small flecks of paint on that Timex watch. Again, this is not nothing groundbreaking. This is already out there on the internet. There was also an off-white brownish substance was on the watch, and not investigators, analysts say that is some sort of adhesive. No doubt that that's a suspect's watch. Cheri Jo Bates put up one hell of a fight, I'm here to tell you. And she ripped that guy's watch off. That should have been enough, right? But unfortunately, it wasn't. That is it. That's the crime scene. Okay? Another important aspect of this crime scene is the car. The reason being is the car was disabled. Okay? That's going to tell you a lot about your offender. Remember when I said the patrolman lifted the hood and he felt the engine pipes were cold, and he saw the distributor cap wire, one singular, pulled off? As he inspected that vehicle, this is very important, and maybe this is something that people don't know. There was fingerprints found on the car. At least this is something that I didn't know. But they weren't latent prints. Some were. They found latent prints. Okay, what's the difference? The patrolman saw greasy fingerprints in various locations on that car. He's seeing this with the naked eye. It's visual to him. It's not a latent print. A latent print is something you can't see with the naked eye, and you have to use dust or super glue or whatever you have in order to bring that print, those oils of the skin, to the surface, and then you pick them up with a tape lift, and they're called latent prints. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about greasy prints that he saw with his naked eye, and where he saw them were important. He saw them on the wind wing. And I had to research that. I didn't know what that was, but now I know, because old cars had that. It's that little small window located next to the big window. 4 inches from that, he seen them on the door handle, an outside latch button. He saw these greasy prints above the the door, and I don't know whether they're driver's side or passenger side. And the reason I don't know that is because the patrolman stated left side, right side. Right? That's very arbitrary. Depends on how you're standing, whether it's left side or right side. But regardless, greasy fingerprints are found in different locations. Now, they did do latent prints, and they found some on the glove box. They found some on the bumpers, the front and rear bumpers of the car, and they actually took those bumpers as evidence, not just the fingerprints. He surmised in his police report that it could possibly be from the person who pulled that singular distributor cap wire. I don't know if I buy that. But just by pulling one wire, if you're going to get your hands greasy. But he visually looked in that engine. He knows how greasy and dirty it was. So I can only go by what he says. And so it is very possible that those fingerprints are that of the person who disabled Cheri Jo Bates' car, which in turn leads you to who the killer was, right? You're not going to have some random stranger disable her car and then she's killed by somebody else. That doesn't make sense, right? So whoever disabled the car is the offender. So fingerprints, very, very important there. They have no suspects right off the bat. The boyfriend, Dennis, has an alibi and he's far away. So what do you want to look at? You want to look at somebody who has any potential conflict with Cheri Jo Bates. And through victimology, police aren't finding anybody. Okay? A very important aspect of this case is that she was not sexually assaulted. That's very important. That's very important. Because then you have to look at, why is somebody murdered? Why does somebody get murdered? Remember, it's sexual, it's jealousy, it's money. When you start ruling those out, then what do you have left? Okay, yes, there's people that are murdered for no reason, but that's from the outside. The outside thinks there's no reason. There's always a reason. Just depending on the levels of what that reasoning is inside the offender's mind. So that is what we have and the police are dealing with, and it's very difficult. Now what they do next, I find extraordinary. I can't think of a better word. Within a week of this homicide, they create a reenactment. And they call on everybody that was in that library to wear the same clothing, to stand in the same positions, sit in the same places they were. If they drove a car, park in the same areas. And when they did that, I believe there was only one person, maybe two, that did not show up. And obviously they thought that potentially could be a suspect. But yeah, sure, but you certainly can't go on that. And they were looking for a vehicle that was parked behind Cheri Jo Bates' car, and that never showed up either. Could that be relevant? Certainly. I don't think so. And I'll tell you why later. Let's go now to the autopsy. So this happens, the brutality is seen. The weapon is a knife with, I believe, at least a 3-inch blade, which is not that big. It certainly did enough damage to Cheri. So it doesn't have to be a 10-inch blade. A 3-inch blade certainly can do a lot of damage. It was reported that maybe she was stomped on in the head. I didn't see that in the autopsy. I've read it, but I didn't see no actual boot heel marks or anything like that on Cheri Jo Bates' body. So I won't say that that happened, but nonetheless, she was stabbed multiple times in the back, in the front, in her arms. She had defensive wounds. She put up a heck of a fight. Her throat was eventually cut or stabbed enough where it cut. There were some reports that she was decapitated. That's not true, but she certainly was beat up pretty good. They did a fingernail scraping of both hands. This is important because they found evidence. What they found underneath her fingernails, a lot of soil, a lot of sand, and something I did not expect to see was plant fibers. From the pictures that I saw, remember I was at the scene, but when I was at the scene 50 years later, it's all concrete now. From what I saw, it was a dirt lot. How does she get plant fibers underneath her fingernails? I didn't see any grass in that area. Possibly it was one of those lots, that you put gravel over, but there's still little shoots of grass that come up like in your driveway, which drive me crazy. It's possible. But the only person that can tell you that is the police that were there at the time. Because that plant fiber is something I did not expect to find underneath her fingernails. In addition, like I said, she had shoes on. She had a purse, which was underneath her when she was found. Nothing of significance were found in there. Let me get another drink before I continue. So the police had come to pretty much a stalemate. They're doing a good job, the reenactment and everything. They're interviewing a lot of people, but it's like a lot of cases. It comes to not a halt, but it slows down. And I believe that in 1967, and I had a date here as to exactly when it was. The individual named BB becomes a suspect, or he gets on the radar. Now, how does he get on the radar? After this murder, certainly the people that know this case, but for those that don't, after this murder, I believe, still in 1966, a typed letter called the confession letter is sent to Cheri Jo Bates' father, and it's also sent to the police saying, I am the killer of Cheri Jo Bates, and this and that, and I'll show the letter here. Very disturbing letter. Why would you not think it's from the killer? Okay? It turns out in 2016 that this is a juvenile that had some problems that wrote this as a hoax. DNA in 2020, I believe, genealogy proved that this was in fact a hoax. So we can just take this confession letter, I believe, totally out of the equation. It doesn't have anything to do with anything but this. When that letter is received, a few months after that letter is received, a letter is received by a professor at Riverside College. And it was of a threatening nature, saying, hey, you're a horrible teacher, if my grades don't get up, or whatever it was, threatening manner. That was turned over to the police, Riverside Police, by this professor. And the professor, in his mind, believed he knew who did it. It was his student, BB. That's right, you guessed it. And the reason he did, because BB was a bad student. He was somebody who was kind of disrespectful, withdrawn, and got bad grades. And he believed through his reading of the homework assignments and stuff that BB did turn in that he was the author of this threatening letter. So the professor sends that to the police department. It goes to the fraud and forgery division. This detective is reading that, and he thinks that there's some similarities between the confession letter and this letter. He shows that to the detective that's in charge of Cheri Jo Bates' case, and he says, okay, let's look into this. Nothing wrong with that. Now we know it has nothing to do with anything. But at the time, that is how BB got on the radar of Riverside Police as a potential suspect. They go and interview BB. They talk to him about the case, obviously. During his initial interview, no big red flags pop out other than he says, hey, my parents were out of town that night of the murder. And remember, this is only a few months up to a year removed from the murder. So his mind is still kind of fresh. It ain't like they're just interviewing him for the first time 20 years later. He says, yeah, I know Cheri. I actually had breakfast the day of her murder with her and her dad actually paid for my breakfast. They're like, whoa, okay. They go and interview Mr. Bates again. Mr. Bates says, no. Me and my daughter ate at a corner booth. There were people around us from church that we knew of, don't know their names, but we're familiar with. Nobody sat with us. Cheri didn't talk to anybody that I know of, and I certainly did not pay for anybody's breakfast. Why is this guy now interjecting himself into this murder investigation? Police are now with their antennas up saying, whoa, we got to look into this guy a little bit further. That is how BB gets on the radar. They go back to Cheri Jo Bates' diary. They read, remember those 1965 entries? All about BB. BB took me home. Him and Mike TP'd my house. You guys remember what that is? Yeah, I know. The younger generation, they don't know because they don't have any fun. Back at the time, you would take toilet paper and you would throw it up into the trees and in the house and stuff. That's what TP somebody means. She makes a lot. And one of the entries is, so-and-so, Lynn told me that BB likes me. Gulp. Things like that. BB is now on the radar. That was on 11/3/66 is when BB is interviewed, and he said that he ate breakfast. So, very soon. And one of the things that I do recall about the police reports is that, and it happens all the time, but when it's very difficult when you're looking back at old cases like this, is when it goes from November, December to January. A lot of the times the year is different. It'll say 67 when it's supposed to be 1968. Because for a whole year you're used to writing 67. That happened a lot in these reports. So it was hard to go back in and see and try to piece this together in a orderly fashion. BB stated that the night of the murders, his parents were out of town. I think I stated that. But also that he went to work that night. And so they were able to check that alibi. The coroner and the medical examiner, they placed Cheri Jo Bates' death between 9 and midnight. I think that's what I have written down here. Yes, 9 and midnight. You can deduce that, and I believe you can deduce it between 9 and 10:30. Now, supposedly, there was some controversy over those times because of the time difference, the clocks being set back, and when people say they heard the scream at 10:30, some people claim that that was actually 9:30 because of the clock being set back and such forth. So there was some controversy there, but I would tend to believe that she died whenever those screams were heard, whether it's 9:15 or whether it's 10:15. Now, 10:15 is a little bit harder for me to believe because that means she left. The library closes at 9. She leaves and she is milling around for an hour. Possibly, but I find that hard to believe. And I'll get into what I think happened. BB did check into work. He punched in. He worked at an aircraft factory. Rohr, R-O-H-R, I believe was the name of it. And he checked in, I believe. He had to be there at midnight, and he checked in at 11:56. He was later terminated about a year later from that job for company infractions. It seems like BB was very, was not a good kid. His background is that he got expelled from one of his junior high schools. He was a thief, mostly car parts, stolen cars. He is alleged to have partaken in at least LSD and marijuana. Cops described him as being very belligerent. And that came pretty evident pretty quickly in 1966, 1967. Oh, I'm sorry. He checked in at work at 11:54 p.m. He had to be there at midnight. So, potentially, he murders Cheri Jo Bates at, let's say, 9:30, 9:15, and punches in at work at 11:54. Certainly possible. Police asked him to take a polygraph. And again, this I believe was in 1966, still the same year as this murder. He refused a polygraph. They asked him for fingerprints. He refused that. And he refused those very emphatically. And the reason I know that is because I remember from the police reports that stood out to me, saying he knew his constitutional rights and he didn't have to do any of that. He subsequently changed his mind, and he did give a polygraph, and he did give his fingerprints. And there is nothing wrong. Now don't get this twisted. There's nothing wrong with somebody refusing those things. Okay? That is your right. That's the way this system is set up. Now, do police look at that as being suspicious when somebody does that? Yes. You've got to understand, their mentality is to solve the case. You're a potential suspect, and the way we do that, hey, it will either eliminate you or it's going to incriminate you. But the reason you do that is to solve the case. And when somebody pushes back, it draws a lot of risk. But you don't know why that person's pushing back. Maybe he had past bad dealings with police. There's so many different reasons. Or maybe he is just a stickler for the Constitution. There's nothing wrong with that. I've had that happen where somebody refused to give me their DNA. And in a murder case, I immediately said, oh, okay, well, why? He had nothing to do with it. He just had been to jail for a number of years on a case, and he didn't trust police. He didn't want to give his DNA. He eventually did. It cleared him. So you can't just take a refusal as guilt. You just can't do it. BB's brother was in the Navy. His sister was in the Air Force. The reason that is important is because if you remember the heel print of the alleged murderer being sold at a military establishment. Although he denied getting any gifts from them, including shoes. 1968, BB gave consent for fingerprints. They compared those fingerprints to the greasy prints and the latent prints pulled off the car, and guess what? No match. His polygraph that he took, which he took again in 1968, March 1st, I believe, inconclusive. Didn't fail, didn't pass, it was inconclusive. BB is on the radar right now in 67, 68 time frame. But things don't ramp up with him until 1982. Looks like a new investigator. It might have been Kelly. I think this Kelly individual was arrested for sexual assault of a 7-year-old, I believe. Fine representation of law enforcement right there. But with that sick thought and everything else pushed to the side, which is very hard for me to do, his police reports were actually pretty thorough. But it appears to me that they were molding their theory to fit this individual. And what do I mean by that? That happens a lot of times in cases that you have some, you make circumstantial evidence. Now this ain't planning evidence. You know, you have physical evidence, you have direct evidence, and you have indirect. This is making things fit your narrative and fit your suspect. An example. They seem to, in starting in 1982, interview a lot of BB's friends and associates, which is great police work. Should have been done in 1968. And maybe it was, I just didn't see that. But I did see in 1982 there was a concerted effort to interview these people. I found it very, I don't want to say disturbing, that's too harsh of a word, but very interesting that almost all of his friends stated he dated Cheri Jo Bates during the homicide. But yet none of her friends said this. Remember what I said about potential double life? And again, that's a wrong word, but a side of her life that people didn't know about. You had a number of people, I'm talking 10 people at least, say, hey, yeah, they were dating. I don't know if dating is a euphemism for having sex. Because back then, I don't think that, you know, in the 50s maybe, but in the 60s, in 82, you know, I would read a line in the report that would say, yeah, I dated Cheri Jo Bates in 1965, and I know BB dated her in 1967. I dated her once in 1968, and twice, not in 1968, she was already certainly deceased, but I'm saying as an example, I dated her once in 1965, and then I dated her twice in 66. Does that mean in a legitimate date, they went out, had dinner, went to the movies, or does that mean they had sex? Because because I never read that word sex anywhere in regards to Cheri Jo Bates. Not even in her diary entries. But all these friends said that they knew that BB and her were dating. But wasn't she dating Dennis at the time? So was she dating two people? In addition to all those interviews, almost every single friend of BB, stated they believed he committed this murder. Now, don't you find that odd? If people went out and started interviewing your friends about a murder, do you think 95% of them would say that, yeah, not only are you capable, but we believe you did it? In addition, at least 3 of these people said that BB admitted it. So, all those are reasons why BB is the #1 suspect to this day as the person who committed this heinous and horrible homicide. One key piece of evidence that I have not discussed yet, and the reason I haven't discussed it is because I wanted to bring it up at the end, because it is certainly very, very important. In the palm of Cheri Jo Bates' right hand, the webbing underneath her thumb, so right here, see what I'm doing? As if you would grasp something, in blood, was a hair. This hair, on November 2nd, 1966, was examined, and the exact wording is, it is definitely not hers. It's of a dirty blonde origin, human, and again, not the victim's. Now, there was, as I said, the fibers underneath her fingernails, also underneath her fingernails, where originally hairs under her fingernails not that are human and not the victim's. That was later changed when they were retested and they were similar to the victims. So what's the difference there? Whether the change in technology or what, but I can't make a determination about those hairs. And certainly I'm concerned about those hairs. But the hair that is the most important to me is the one that was right here. In blood. Now, as hard as she fought, and we got into that, hard enough that she ripped off his watch. I will never change my mind that is the suspect's hair. Now, I remember filming for Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, and I remember discussing that with a detective. And I believe their response was, it could be anybody's hair. I have a big problem with that. To me, you are ignoring significant evidence to make something fit your narrative. Now, I'm going to get into whether I believe it was BB, because there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, and I'm going to go piece by piece of why I think it could be BB, and maybe it is, and also why I don't think it is. But that hair, to me, was taken at the autopsy table. I find it almost impossible for that to be somebody at the crime scene or contamination. I find it so hard to believe. Let me go over some of these notes. We went over the fingernail scrapings, the significance of the fingerprints. Let me briefly get into this desk poem. You notice I haven't talked anything really about Zodiac, and that's because this is not a Zodiac video. This is the murder of Cheri Jo Bates. Now, whether the Zodiac committed this murder like he claimed or not is for another video. But this desk poem that was found at the college where Cheri Jo Bates was murdered, if you read it, it's certainly disturbing. As you see the evidence photograph, the actual original of it right here. It has nothing to do with Cheri Jo Bates. That's my opinion. So I'm not going to talk about it. Does it have something to do with Zodiac? Some people like to think that. I do not. So I'm not even going to discuss it. That it's not connected to this. Just like Riverside will tell you that Zodiac is not connected to this. I'm not sure if I'm going to agree with that by the end of this video or not. But based off of the evidence, are there any other suspects in the Cheri Jo Bates murder? BB is certainly a suspect. There's no getting around that. But how about Ross Sullivan? Okay, you have a letter that was sent by the librarians there who very much suspected Ross Sullivan in this murder. But where's the evidence? I see no evidence of it. And I know that we looked at Ross Sullivan, and remember, in the hunt for the Zodiac Killer, we were given these suspects, okay, to start out with. Ross Sullivan and Lawrence Kane. We didn't develop those. That's the way the show wanted to go. Now, Ross Sullivan, because he is standoffish, because he did do some crypto training and he's weird, does that automatically make him a suspect for this murder? According to some people, not me. Okay, I'd have to see a lot more about Ross Sullivan to connect him to this murder. I know the show says this, but it's a reality show. And it's not really reality. A lot of it is scripted. It goes the way they want it to go. Okay? There were certain aspects of Ross Sullivan that certainly looked good. But I'd have to know a lot more to be able to say that it was a specific person. Now, if we leave it general and say, let's just say we have number one suspect BB here, and then we have outside offender, unknown offender. Okay, I'm comfortable then. And we will list, okay, why BB, why an unknown offender. And we'll get into that. I have a lot of questions in regards to this case as well, but one of the things that doesn't make sense to me, there was talk that BB was playing basketball the day of this murder when he somehow got a phone call from Cheri Jo Bates, who told him she was going to the library. And he had made mention in this basketball game that the bitch is going to the library. I don't see anywhere where that's backed up. They don't have cell phones. I don't know if I get into that, okay? Apparently, investigators want you to believe, and I see why they say this. that BB was a jilted lover. A week prior to this, a witness says they observed BB slap Cheri in the face at a Denny's restaurant. Also previous to this, Cheri Jo Bates was talking to a friend of hers, and I believe his name was Ryan, on campus when BB walked up to them, interjected himself into the conversation, and said, "Are you ready to go out with me yet?" in a joking manner. Her response was to laugh it off. He leaves. Ryan says to her, "You're not going to go out with him, right?" And she's, he's not your type. And she agreed. But there was something about him, because she was hanging around him. And according to all of BB's friends, they were dating. So was she dating him at the same time she was dating Dennis? And then when Dennis proposed to her and she accepted a week previous to this, Cheri was getting rid of him, that he became jilted. Sure. Does that not make sense? It does. Does the rage in the crime scene match a jilted lover? Yes, it certainly does. So I can see why investigators have BB. In the early 2000s, I want to believe, and I believe Detective Shumway told me this, that he met BB at the airport because BB moved out of the country. Now, I read that was for employment purposes, but according to people that believe BB is a suspect, why not do that if you're involved in this murder? That makes perfect sense. So that just fits in line with him being the person who committed this heinous act. But I believe Shumway met him with a search warrant to get his DNA. And what are they going to compare that to? That hair that was found in the webbing of Cheri Jo Bates' hand. And they did that, and guess what? That's right. Did not match. So is BB still a suspect? According to Riverside, he's still the man. What do I think? This is what I think. If BB was a jilted lover, and Cheri Jo Bates did not want to see him anymore because she's getting married, do I believe those two were a connection? Yes, I do. And I believe she must have hidden that from her family, hidden it from friends, but his friends knew. They all cannot be mistaken. They've seen them together. She wrote about them in her diary. So by her own admission, there was something going on with BB. If he decides, you know what, I'm going to kill her. If he has rage towards her, why is he going to do it in a public forum like the Riverside campus at 9 o'clock at night? In addition, if let's say he decides that's where he's going to do this at, I would expect witnesses to hear a confrontation, a conflict between BB and Cheri Jo Bates. Wouldn't he confront her? To me, that makes sense. But there was none. Nobody heard no argument. They just heard a scream, then a muffled scream, then 2 hours later, 2 minutes later, a loud car starting up and pulling away. What I believe took place, potentially, I'm not saying this 1,000%, but what the crime scene and the evidence tells me, and I've never heard this anywhere, and I'm not one of those people to make claims up just to throw them out there, unless you have evidence to back it up. But it seems to me, potentially, that somebody was trying to abduct Cheri Jo Bates. Now, why do I say that? Number one, the distributor wire being removed, unplugged. Why would a jilted boyfriend have to do that? Now, it matches his background. Car thief. He was caught with a stolen stereo system from a car when police did a search warrant on his house. Certainly matches that. But yet, why would he have to do that? Couldn't he confront her at her own home? Couldn't he confront her unless... Now, certainly if he knew that she would not talk to him, maybe they already had a conflict, and she said, don't talk to me anymore, I'm done with you. Then him undoing the distributor wire would kind of make sense to me. But why in a public forum like that? Is it because he knew she was going to be there? How did he know that? It's more likely he knows when she's going to be home. And that's when you do it. You know, the mom is not there. She's not in their life. The brother is in the Navy. He's not there. The only person in the home is the father, but he also works. So it makes more sense to me that if you are going to confront her and she won't talk to you, you do it at Cheri Jo Bates' home. Not on the river. And the only reason you do it at the Riverside campus is if something snapped and you have rage, you have anger right then and there. She did something right then and there that makes you angry. But then witnesses would hear the conflict. And there was none. The pulling of the distributor wire is extremely important. And to me, that goes against BB. To me, that is somebody who's seen her and is the opportunity to take her. Because you don't know where she lives. You don't know anything other than, I seen her now. She matches my fantasy at this time. And I'm going to use this ruse. So how do I see this playing out? Okay, he sees her. Maybe he did follow her from somewhere. Regardless, he knew she was going to be in that library. He parks not behind her, not directly behind her. You wouldn't do that. That's why I don't put stock in that car in the reenactment. You would park more down by where her body was found 100 yards away. And when you do this, you wait till she goes into the library. You disable her vehicle. You wait. And you don't wait in an alleyway where the witness says she saw somebody that matched BB's description, smoking a cigarette, waiting. And yes, they did try to get DNA off of that cigarette. I don't know the results of that. It did not match BB. I'm pretty sure of that. You wouldn't wait all the way down there. Now, why? Well, because if she comes out, tries to start her car, and it doesn't work, the offender wants to be the first person there to offer help. You don't want to take the chance of being too far away, then all of a sudden somebody from the library, a guy comes out and says, hey, you need help, then you lose your chance. No, this offender was closer. And then that way, hey, do you need help? He's right there. There's no chance that she gets help from anybody else. We know she made it to the car because the books that she checked out were in the front seat of her car. She left the car ignition, the keys in the ignition. I think he tried helping her. Therefore, the greasy prints. Now, according to the police reports, her car was just washed on the outside the day previous. The inside was swept out and wiped, dusted down that day. So those greasy fingerprints, to me, are the offender showing that he's trying to help her out. Hey, let me look underneath the hood. Let me mess around with some things here. It isn't from the distributor wire. It's from him pretending that he's helping her. Okay, shut that. Now his greasy fingerprints are there. He goes over and talks to her while she's trying to start the car. Has his hands up on top of the car, her window, exactly where the greasy prints were found. And he's talking to her. Hey, try this, do that. He knows it ain't starting, but he's pretending. And he's putting his prints everywhere. And he says, okay, my car is down here. I'll take you to call somebody, take you to get help, whatever the ruse is. I believe she isn't going to go home with him. She doesn't know him. She leaves the car, the keys in the ignition, and her books in the car. I believe if she was leaving, she would have taken those items. The windows were down a little bit. So he starts walking with her, and he puts a knife to her back. Or puts a gun. He could have carried a gun. I would expect that he would have killed her with the gun, but maybe not, because it's in a public area, right? You don't want to hear gunshots. So maybe he just has a knife to her back, and he's walking her, and she's walking and she's scared. She doesn't know what to do, and they're getting closer. She can see his car coming up. He might even have told her, hey, we're going to be getting in this car. You make a move, I'm going to kill you. But guess what? She does break free. And she runs down that alley. It's the first alley that she sees to her left that offers an escape. Maybe she doesn't know that it's leading to a dead end. Well, whatever. But that would account for the stabbing in the back. And he catches her. The witnesses hear her scream, and then a muffled scream because he tries to cover her mouth. Now, the fantasy is not going the way that he wants it to go. He's fantasized about this for months, years. Getting her in the car, taking her back, being a sexual assault. But it doesn't happen. And she runs, and he panics, and he kills her, and he's angry. And that's why all the stuff. Plus, she's fighting back. So he's fighting for his life. Okay? It's not necessarily overkill that you can point to a domestic spouse or jilted ex-boyfriend. It's a fight. And the fight is on. You ruined my fantasy. You're fighting me. I'm going to make sure that you're dead. Within 2 minutes, it's over. He gets in the car, which is parked near where that alleyway is where she was found. Starts it up. Witnesses hear that. He takes off. The evidence points me more towards that scenario than it does a jilted ex-boyfriend killing his ex-girlfriend in a public area by knife without witnesses hearing any confrontation. No screaming, no yelling, back and forth. No man's voice heard. A female scream, then a muffled scream, then a car starting. All right, so I'm going to go over my notes now that I gave you that assessment. I have down here written, it was premeditated. Now remember what premeditated means. Premeditation does not mean you have to plan it in months in advance. It's minutes in advance. The car was disabled. There's only one reason to do that. Someone didn't know her, or the offender knew that she would not talk to them. We discussed that. The keys and the car in the books. I don't believe that the offender was lying in wait in the alley. I already went through that. Because how would the offender know that she's going to go that way? Her car isn't even parked that way. If you listen to Shumway, you would think that, but that's not the case. The car was up the other direction. So I don't believe that. More likely, the offender approached after the car would not start. This ensures that she goes with him and not to find somebody else. We talked about that. He offers his assistance, and that's why his prints are all over that car. No sexual assault. Okay? That's significant. Now, that points to two areas. That points to BB, right? The number one suspect, according to investigators. But it also points to an abduction gone wrong. It's not an ideal place to murder somebody. Let me take that back. It is in the general scope of the campus. It's dark. It's an alleyway. If you're going to murder somebody on campus, I think that would be a pretty good location. But I went through the reasons why I don't believe that was planned to take place there. It doesn't make sense. To me, it just makes a lot more sense that this was an abduction. Now, there was an abduction, a sexual assault that did take place not far from this campus months after this murder. He strangled her, he left her for dead. She didn't die, she survived. Could that be connected to this? It certainly could be. I have down here the 2016 letter was a joke by a juvenile. In 2020, they confirmed the confession letter was a sick joke. And they confirmed that with DNA off of the stamp. Shoes missing, I went into that, how wrong that was. Possible abduction, that she ran from the offender. I went over that. The fingernail scrapings, the fingerprint significance, greasy fingerprints, we went over that. Not latent prints, although some of those latents were found. I have a big question mark is here. Why does BB inject himself into that breakfast on Sunday morning with Cheri Jo Bates and the father? And Joseph Bates adamantly denied that. Why does he do that? And he made a very intriguing statement to investigators that I know had to throw red flags to the investigators. I know it did. When it was either his first or second interview, he said, but Cheri didn't say she was going to the library, though. That's a very, very odd statement to make. Again, I see why police are zoned in on him. I see it. Doesn't necessarily make it so. A lot of notes here. Heel prints, the watch. BB supposedly, they interviewed his father. And his father said, yes, BB did own a Timex watch. And he lost it either his sophomore or junior year in high school. Does that have significance? I think so. I think it could. Maybe he legitimately did lose it then. But I can't see, if a person was wearing a watch for how many years, he loses it, and then he doesn't replace it again. So I don't know whether BB wore a watch after this case or not. There was speculation that some witnesses saw 2 flashlights back at the crime scene, and people, theorized that they were back there looking for the incriminating watch, which is certainly possible. This is all about BB and why, we felt that, or they felt that he was a good suspect. In addition to him losing a watch, according to his father, whether he was a sophomore or junior or when he lost it, they were renovating houses during that time frame. The summer of 1966. So just a few months before Cheri Jo Bates died. That's how the search warrant got generated in this case, as they were looking for paint samples to match to the watch. Do I find that incriminating in any way? I think a lot of people did a lot of painting, so I don't find that odd. Good way to get a search warrant, though, I will say that. Let's get into the reasons for the reasons BB is a main suspect, okay, and why it could be an unknown offender. The reasons for BB is the recent engagement of Cheri Jo Bates to Dennis Highland. That is certainly catalyst for a potential explosion of murder, especially if Cheri Jo and Dennis, or Cheri Jo and BB were dating. And although it's not 100%, I think it seems like they were. I mean, there's just too many people that said that they were dating. Seems all of his friends knew that Cheri Jo and BB were dating. There was, I have written down here, anger in the kill. There was certainly anger there. But was that anger because of a breakup or because of a ruined fantasy? He admitted this to his friend Bobby, supposedly. Got a big question mark on that. Bobby was looking for a way out of jail. Just not sure. I'm just not sure I believe that. He says, that they did LSD together and then they leave and they're not together at all throughout the night, and then at 6 a.m. he runs into BB, just happens upon him in this restaurant where he confesses that he snuffed Cheri. Man, I find that hard to believe, especially when BB checked into work at 11:57. I don't know. All of his friends think that he did it. I mean, that's very odd. He bragged about beating the polygraph to all of his friends. Numerous friends, at least 5, 6 friends that he talked to. Now, why would you brag about beating a polygraph by tensing your muscles during certain questions if you had nothing to do with the murder? Right? So that is certainly incriminating, but it's circumstantial evidence. Him being familiar with cars, obviously with the distributor wire being unplugged. Now let's look at the reason for an unknown offender. Number one, that hair in her hand, it doesn't match him. That is why they will never get a conviction if they arrested this guy. And they believe it's him. And they believe they probably have enough circumstantial. But because of that piece of evidence, they will never, I would venture to say they would never even make an arrest. But they certainly will never get a conviction. Now, what should they do with that? Genealogy. Okay? You need to figure out who hair that. Exclude it. If you think that it is BB, and you listen, the police know more about this case than I do. I read the reports, yes. I have some of the reports, yes. But they have volumes. All it is one sentence that maybe I didn't read that is very incriminating. So they believe that this is the guy. Well, you have to test. They did test that. You have to do genealogy on that and track down that family tree. Because if it is somebody and it's an innocent person's hair, the medical examiners, a police officer on scene whose hair happened to fly out of their head and land right there, I don't believe that. But if you believe that, then test it. You're doing a disservice to Cheri Jo Bates, to Michael Bates, her brother, and to Joseph Bates, her father, if you don't test that. That's just wrong. That's just wrong. You got to. No matter where it points. Other reasons for an unknown offender. None of Cheri Jo Bates' friends that I read knew anything about her dating BB. The location, to me, doesn't point, the location of the body, the crime scene, doesn't point to me to be BB. It points to an unknown offender. A possible abduction, we went into that. And this is important. If she called BB and said she was going to the library. Just like some people have theorized, why would he have to disable the car? Why couldn't he just walk in and confront her if he was upset about her breaking up with him? He went to work that night. Checked in. Could he have committed the murders and then gone to work? Certainly. Could have. But you would think after something like that, I don't know. Again, I would expect an argument and the confronting and a conflict that would have been witnessed or heard, and that wasn't the case. Well, I believe that's going to be everything that I can remember about this case. Most, if not all of this stuff is already out there. So I don't feel like I'm hurting the case or doing anything by giving my personal assessment. Like I said, I had access to this stuff for the show. A lot of this stuff I said for the show, it just never made it. So I'm just regurgitating a lot of it now, where it's not censored and I can get my opinion out there. Interviewing Cheri Jo Bates' brother was very heartwarming for me. And, one of the things that, that little note that she wrote to her dad, I just never forget that. I also was shown her address book by Michael. And what I remember is that this guy's phone number wasn't in there. A lot of his friends that she wrote about in the diary was there, but his wasn't. I found that odd too. Strange case. Very heartbreaking case. But that's my assessment. That's what the evidence tells me. I believe that, she was being abducted and she ran, and that ruined the fantasy. And that's why she was killed right then and there. And then the offender fled. And is it Zodiac? Well, again, that's for another video. But I will say that I don't believe that it's BB. And I gave all the reasons why I don't believe that. Certainly a good suspect. I certainly don't fault police, the investigators, for the route that they are going down. But man, that evidence right there is the key piece. And the fingerprints. To me, that all plays to me as an abduction. So that's my theory on the case. Cheri Jo Bates murder, 10/30/1966. As always, my heart goes out to the victim's family, to Michael. I'm just sorry. I wish more could be done, and I hope more is done, and I hope genealogy will be done. They've done genealogy to determine the letter was from this juvenile in 1966. So I know that they are using genealogy. Let's hope they can do it on this. It's the only way this case is getting solved, in my opinion. So, with that, hey, another case. Mains out.